Willie Nelson is the man in the bandana with the two braids, the beat-up old guitar, and a voice that sounds like it was carved out of Texas dust. For most of the world, he's the guy who wrote On the Road Again, the guy who still tours in his 90s, the guy who seems to have made peace with everything life ever threw at him. But behind that easy smile is one of the most painful life stories in American music. Willie Nelson didn't just build a legendary career. He survived poverty, abandonment, addiction, fire, financial ruin, and the kind of grief that breaks most people permanently. This is the real story of how a barefoot kid from a cotton field in Texas became a living legend, and the heartbreak he carried every step of the way. Willie Hugh Nelson was born on April 29, 1933, in the tiny town of Abbott, Texas, right in the middle of the Great Depression. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by absence. His parents, Ira and Merle, split up when he was just a baby. His mother left town not long after he was born, chasing work wherever she could find it. His father remarried and eventually moved on as well, leaving young Willie and his older sister, Bobby, to be raised by their grandparents in a small farmhouse with barely enough money to get by. It would be easy to assume a childhood like that leaves nothing but scars, and in some ways it did. But Willie's grandparents gave the two kids something that would end up defining the rest of his life: music. His grandfather, a blacksmith by trade, taught him his first chords on a guitar he bought through the mail. Willie was only 6 years old when he started learning to play, and by 7 he was already writing his own songs. Then, just as he was starting to find his footing, tragedy struck again. His grandfather died of pneumonia when Willie was only 6, leaving the family to lean even harder on his grandmother to hold things together. Life in Abbott meant long, brutal days picking cotton under the Texas sun, work Willie despised with everything in him. He would later describe standing in those fields as a boy, sweat pouring down his back, thinking there had to be a better way to make a living. That thought never left him. Music became his escape valve, the one place where the poverty and the loneliness didn't reach him. He sang gospel songs in church, joined a local polka band as a 9-year-old, and started playing at dances and honky-donks while he was still just a young teenager, handing whatever money he made straight to his family. By the time Willie graduated high school, he had already lived a life most adults hadn't. He played football and baseball, raised hogs for a farming club, and performed on a local radio show with a band led by his brother-in-law. But nothing about his path forward was clear. He joined the U.S. Air Force after graduation, only to be discharged less than a year later because of ongoing back problems. He tried college next, enrolling at Baylor University to study agriculture, but the pull of music was too strong, and he dropped out before finishing. What followed was nearly a decade of grinding, unglamorous survival. Willie worked as a tree trimmer, a saddle maker, a nightclub bouncer, a phone operator, and a door-to-door salesman peddling Bibles and encyclopedias to families who could barely afford groceries, let alone a set of books. He hated that job more than almost any other, and later admitted it ate at his conscience every time he made a sale. He worked at radio stations across Texas and the Pacific Northwest, cutting his first singles on borrowed equipment, only to have them rejected by every label he sent them to. At one particularly low point, broke and out of options, Willie tried his luck in San Diego and found nothing waiting for him there either. Desperate to get to his mother in Portland, Oregon, he started hitchhiking north with no ride in sight. He ended up sleeping in a ditch on the side of the road, a guitar as his only possession, with no idea what came next. Eventually, he caught a freight train partway there, and a stranger, a truck driver who felt sorry for him, handed him $10 for a bus ticket. It's a small, almost forgettable act of kindness in the story of a legend's rise, but for Willie in that moment, it was the difference between giving up and pushing forward. Willie's early career wasn't built on big breaks. It was built on him selling away the very songs that would later become part of American musical history, just to put food on the table. He sold Family Bible outright for a small sum, and it became a hit for another singer without his name ever attached to it. He sold Nightlife for even less. He wasn't chasing songwriting credit at that point in his life. He was chasing rent money. By 1960, Willie packed up his family and moved to Nashville, the beating heart of country music, hoping to finally catch a break. Instead, he found rejection after rejection from labels that didn't know what to make of him. He spent his nights at a bar near the Grand Ole Opry, playing for tips and hoping someone influential would notice. Eventually, someone did. A songwriter took a liking to his talent and used his own money to help get Willie signed to a publishing deal. From there, other artists began recording his songs and turning them into massive hits, songs Willie himself had written but wouldn't become famous for performing. Patsy Cline's version of Crazy became one of the most played jukebox songs in history. Other artists scored chart hits with songs like Hello Walls and Funny How Time Slips Away. Willie Nelson, the songwriter, was becoming known. Willie Nelson, the performer, was still virtually invisible. Behind the slow rise in his career, Willie's personal life was falling apart in ways that took years to surface. He married singer Shirley Cauley in the early 1960s, but the marriage was already fractured by an affair he was having with another woman, Connie Kepke. The secret came out in the cruelest way possible. Shirley opened the mail one day and found a hospital bill for the birth of a baby girl, a child Willie had fathered with Connie. There was no explaining it away. The marriage ended shortly after, and Willie went on to marry Connie in 1971. Willie has never pretended those years were anything but messy. He's spoken candidly in interviews about how he handled relationships poorly for much of his younger life, and about the pain his choices caused the people closest to him. Yet in a strange way, he's also made peace with that chapter, insisting there's no such thing as an ex-wife in his mind, only additional family. It's a line that captures something essential about how Willie has processed a lifetime of complicated relationships, not with denial, but with an odd, hard-won acceptance. By the late 1960s, Willie had built a modest but respectable career, though he was pouring nearly every dollar he earned back into touring just to keep his band on the road. The strain was constant. Then, in December of 1970, disaster hit in the most literal sense. His ranch home in Tennessee burned to the ground. It was more than a financial blow. For Willie, it felt like the universe delivering a message. He walked into that burning house and, according to the story he's told for decades, made a point of retrieving two things: his guitar and a pound of marijuana. Everything else he let go. That fire became a turning point. Willie left Nashville behind entirely and moved back to Texas, settling near Austin, a city with a wide-open, rule-breaking music scene that had no interest in the polished, buttoned-up sound Nashville demanded. It was there, freed from the expectations of the industry that had rejected him for over a decade, that Willie found his true voice. He grew out his hair, put on the bandana that would become his trademark, and helped invent what the world now calls outlaw country, raw, unpolished, deeply personal music that finally sounded like him. The 1970s and 1980s turned Willie Nelson into a household name. Albums like Shotgun Willie, Phases and Stages, and the now iconic Red-Headed Stranger reshaped what country music could sound like. On the Road Again, a song he reportedly scribbled down on an airplane sickness bag, became his signature anthem and earned him an Academy Award nomination. He joined forces with Johnny Cash, Waylon Jennings, and Chris Christopherson to form the Highwaymen, one of the most beloved supergroups in country music history. He tried his hand at acting alongside major Hollywood names. He co-founded Farm Aid in 1985 to support struggling American farmers, a cause he has stayed devoted to every single year since. But fame didn't erase the hard years, it just gave them new shapes. Willie has openly admitted there was a stretch of time in Nashville, before any of the success arrived, when he sank into a depression so heavy he barely recognized himself. He was living out of a rundown trailer parked next to a cemetery, drinking heavily to numb the disappointment of a career that refused to take off. In his darkest moment, after one too many drinks, he wandered out into the middle of a street late at night and lay down in the road, half expecting, half hoping that a car would end it. No car came. He got up, walked back to the bar, and ordered another drink. It's a story he has told with striking honesty over the years, not to shock anyone, but because he believes people deserve to know that even a legend once hit a bottom that low. Just when Willie seemed to have it all, the ground shifted again. In 1990, the IRS came after him for millions in unpaid taxes, the result of a bad investment scheme his financial advisors had steered him into years earlier. The agency seized nearly everything he owned: his ranches, his recording studio, even master recordings of his own music. His sister Bobby later said the hardest part wasn't losing the houses or the land. It was losing the music itself, the one thing that had always belonged to him, no matter what else fell apart. Willie eventually settled the debt by releasing an album specifically to pay it off, once again turning catastrophe into a reason to keep working rather than a reason to quit. If the IRS collapse was a gut punch, what came next was something far worse. In 1991, not long after a major magazine profile had explored the sadness running underneath Willie's public image, his oldest son, Willie Nelson, died by suicide on Christmas Day. Willie had been working on a gospel album in the months before his death. Willie has said in the years since that nothing in his long, difficult life ever hit him as hard as losing his son. It's the kind of grief that never fully closes, and Willie has rarely spoken about it in detail, choosing instead to let his music and his continued devotion to his surviving children speak for him. As Willie moved into his later decades, loss became almost a constant companion. In 2020, his longtime drummer, bodyguard, and closest friend, Paul English, died at 87. The two had met back in 1956 and stayed inseparable for more than 60 years. Willie has described Paul as fearless, loyal, and larger than life, a man who once famously said that if he hadn't joined Willie's band all those years ago, he'd have ended up in prison or dead. Willie loved him enough to name his own daughter after him. When Paul passed, Willie's family said no one could ever truly fill the space he left behind. Then, in 2022, Willie lost his sister Bobby, the person who had been by his side since the very beginning, since those childhood days learning gospel songs together at their grandparent house. Bobby wasn't just family. She played piano in his band for decades and co-authored a memoir with him about their shared childhood. Willie has said plainly that he wouldn't be who he is without her, that he needed her presence his entire life. Losing her meant losing the last living link to where his whole story began. In 2024, Willie lost yet another piece of his musical family when Chris Christopherson passed away at 88, leaving Willie as the sole surviving member of the Highwaymen. Willie's tribute to his old friend was simple and heavy with feeling, gratitude for the songs Christopherson left behind, and sadness at losing someone he had spent decades making music and memories with. Willie's health has quietly paid the price for a lifetime of hard living. He started smoking cigarettes as a young child, trading eggs from the family henhouse for packs of Camels, and has said candidly that cigarettes ultimately killed both of his parents and both of his step-parents. He eventually gave up cigarettes, but continued smoking marijuana for decades, crediting it with helping him manage pain and anxiety, before eventually giving that up too as it began affecting his breathing. He now relies on edibles instead. Along the way, he's dealt with a collapsed lung and a diagnosis of emphysema, a progressive lung condition that makes every breath a little harder than the last. In 2015, doctors performed a stem cell procedure in an effort to repair some of the damage his lungs had suffered over the decades. Despite all of it, Willie has continued to perform well into his 90s, a fact that stuns doctors and fans alike. He has said in interviews that he honestly isn't afraid of death, that he feels physically strong for his age even if, as he jokes, his memory isn't quite what it used to be. That kind of calm isn't denial. It's the perspective of a man who has already stared down more heartbreak than most people could survive, and come out the other side still standing, still smiling, still walking out on stage. In recent years, Willie has turned his attention directly toward mortality in his music instead of avoiding it. His album, The Last Leaf on the Tree, released around his 92nd birthday and produced with the help of his son Micah, dives straight into themes of aging, loss, and legacy. Willie has described the record as an attempt to face death with grace rather than fear, filling it with songs about the people he's outlived and the marks he hopes to leave behind. It's a fitting late chapter for an artist who has spent his entire life turning pain into something people can sing along to. Willie Nelson's story was never a fairy tale. It's a story of a boy abandoned by his parents, a man who slept in a ditch with nothing but a guitar, a songwriter who sold away his own